A female nurse was assaulted by a man. After she recovered, not only did she not resent the man at all, she even dressed up and visited him in prison. Until the end. You'll never guess her real purpose. It's so chilling. Lon is an excellent nurse, because she's been single for years. Colleagues introduced their friend to her, and set the date at her home. On the appointed date, suddenly heard a noise from the door. She opened the door, and saw a disheveled man, although he didn't meet his requirements. But out of courtesy, she invited him in, but during the conversation, he kept giving her dirty looks. This is not what my best friend describes as gentlemanly. After asking for details of the date, he realized he had the wrong man. He told him to leave, but instead of leaving, he turned around and locked the door behind him. It was obvious that the man hadn't listened. Then he became furious and pressed him to the ground. Although Ran fought back, but she couldn't match the man's strength. Eventually, she was forced. A few moments later, his date arrived with flowers in his hand. He knocked on the door, and when no one answered, he went inside. Then he was shocked by the tragedy in the kitchen. He called the police and sent Ran to the hospital. Ran woke up in the hospital with bruises all over her face. Although she was physically unharmed, but she was mentally devastated. She was staring blankly at the ceiling. Suddenly he remembered the identity of the culprit. It was a delivery boy who used to deliver to him. The police followed the clues, soon arrested the man who was about to escape. Although the culprit was sentenced to death, but Ran didn't get over it. Everything that happened today is a nightmare for her. Her father came home and touched the house with a trembling hand. He blamed himself for not being able to protect his daughter. All he could do now was to be careful with her. He could only be careful with her now. Soon Ran was discharged from the hospital, but he was still shutting himself away. He wanted to move to a place where no one knew him and start over. But the bad thing is, because of this terrible incident, no one wanted to buy her house, so he couldn't afford a new home. He had no choice but to stay here, back to work in the hospital. Due to the trauma, his hands couldn't stop shaking. For a nurse, this is undoubtedly the most cruel thing. In order to help him get well soon, they gave him dolls as gifts, but no matter how much he practiced at home, his hands would not stop shaking. Gradually, his personality began to become irritable. He didn't know how to vent his anger. After countless sleepless nights, he had a knack for cooking. That day he put pen to paper and wrote a letter to a man in prison. But the letters were soon returned the same way they were sent. Ran wasn't discouraged. He kept sending one letter after another. After writing the letters, he was no longer depressed. He was optimistic about reality. He regained his previous state of life. After sending one letter after another, he finally received a reply. He could go to visit the prison. A woman walks into a prison. She's here to visit the criminal who assaulted her. They were facing each other through the glass. William thought he was being questioned, so he was too submissive to look the woman in the eye. He couldn't stop apologizing, but Ran stared at him with wide eyes. Then she asked him about his life with tenderness in her eyes. William was baffled. What's going on? Does this woman have Stockholm Syndrome? Since then, Ren came to visit him in prison from time to time. Her makeup became more and more exquisite, and her clothes became more and more sexy. Just like a girl in love, facing the care of the beauty in front of him, William was tempted. Gradually, he became obsessed with her. She's now hopeful that her life will get back on track. In order to get out of jail soon, she didn't even fight back against her fellow inmates. When Ran visited again, learned about this and gently asked about the injury, he proudly lifted up his shirt, showing the long wound. He didn't notice. Ran at this moment was looking at him with a perverted gaze, admiring his scar. They saw each other more and more often. William was looking forward to getting out of prison. On this day, he proudly said, because of his good behavior, he would be out of prison in a few days. Ran was shocked when she heard this, but she quickly changed the subject. He said that if he changed his ways, everything would be fine. And William also took the opportunity to show that he was a new man, and hoped that after his release, he would be given a chance. Let him make amends to Ran, and said if he really didn't want to accept him, he would disappear and never bother her again. Ran listened to this as if she was thinking. On her way back, she received a call from her father. The dog that had been with him for years had died in an accident. Ren comforted her father. She buried the dog with him. That day, Ren was working when she suddenly received a bouquet of flowers. It's from William. He had been released from prison. He couldn't wait to call and begged for a meeting. Ren refused, said he wasn't ready. But the next day when Ren arrived home, She was shocked. This man still came uninvited. Strangely, Rand didn't look unhappy. Instead, she greeted him warmly. William also breathed a sigh of relief. He began to help him repair the house. The man worked hard, the woman poured water, like a happy couple. Everything seemed so beautiful. But after William left, Rand slowly put away her smile. The man and woman are painting a chair. The man looks at the woman with love in his eyes. The woman smiles back. The atmosphere between them is becoming more and more ambiguous. It's as if they're about to go back inside and start a fight. But who would have thought that this man had committed a crime against a woman a few months earlier? Had committed a crime against a woman. Suddenly William started to have abdominal pains. He fainted in Rand's house. When she opened her eyes, she was tied to the bed, only to see Rand wearing the dress she wore on the day of the murder, gently caressing her body. But her attitude was not as gentle as before. It turns out, she killed the dog that had accompanied her father for years, just because the dog damaged his clothes. He had a grudge and experimented on the dog's body. To test the trick of poisoning people, William panicked and called her crazy. But Rand didn't care. She slowly revealed her true purpose. He wanted William to fall in love with him, so that he would let his guard down. He'll take revenge by himself after he's tricked him to his home. After saying that, she injected anesthetic into William's body. When William woke up again, Lon was sitting beside him. She put her hand under the quilt to soothe William, but William hated women. He grabbed his hand and pushed it hard. Lon screamed in pain, but the next moment, William was shocked, since both of his hands were unharmed. Then what was it that he grabbed? As the quilt was lifted, William collapsed. His left hand was cut off senselessly. William wailed in agony as he lost hope. But Rand's vengeance went far beyond that. He lifted the quilt to make William suffer even more. William's tools were confiscated. Rand just watched the man's screams with indifference. He finished his revenge with his own hands.